pleasure to be here with you, with two very eminent persons. One a political scientist, the other an economist. Devesh Kapur, to the left, is a professor at Johns Hopkins University. And Arvind Subramanian is with the Peterson Institute, both of them in the US. We know Arvind better as Indians would know him better as the former chief economic advisor. And we are here to discuss mostly this book, A Sixth of Humanity, meaning Indians make up a sixth of the world population today. Beautiful title to the book. Yeah. So what I liked about the book, just to warm you up to what we're going to discuss, is there's a joke about the even-handed journalist. For heaven's sake, give me a one-handed economist. This is actually a very balanced book. It's a two-handed in that sense. The book says at the very beginning that it doesn't give an apocalyptic look to India, saying India is broken. Neither does it neither does it gush, saying India is going to be the next superpower. So that gives you an advanced introduction to the book itself. And because he was economic advisor during the first Modi tenure, many of you would presume that there is a leaning. I didn't find any. In fact, Devesh Kapur was just telling me before we got on stage that they wanted data to talk. So indeed, data is talking to the book. Before I even ask them any questions, I understand that one of the reasons that prompted them to write the book is a book by Ramachandra Guha about India's political history post-independence. In fact, we always tend to think that independence was day before yesterday. It's been a while. We are 75 years plus. So high time that somebody wrote a history about a recent past. Because we keep talking about pre-independence, the independence struggle, then the Mughals, and then go on behind. But what about the latest? So this book is actually something like the economic equivalent of what Ramachandra Guha has done about India's economy, market, state, nation in the last 75 years plus. But I would just, to warm up my discussants, I would ask them how and why they thought about writing this book.
First of all, thank you, Jyot, and thanks to Malayalam Manorama for inviting us. We're really delighted to be here. A wonderful setting to be discussing, talking about our book. When you said, "Oh, the book is not biased," and he worked for the government. So I'm not sure whether you intend to say because he worked, he would be biased for or against the government. It was a bit uncertain, but just wanted to clarify that. Yeah. So Devesh and I have been working on India and Indian issues for a long time. Devesh has many excellent books on the Indian state capacity. He's written about the diaspora in the US, Indian diaspora, and of course many other things. And I'm an economist, and both of us have been thinking about India for a long time. Now, I think at some point we got together and said, look, firstly, there isn't anything like India after Gandhi in economics, so we thought we could. So the aim was kind of, can we write a book spanning these 75 years, which is fairly rigorous but also readable, like Ram Guha's book, that is also data-driven that you mentioned, and doesn't start with some priors then. And the last thing I would say, and let Devesh add to that, is that certainly both of us strongly believe that economists have a very narrow view of development. It's about state and markets. Political scientists have also a narrow view of development where they talk about politics and society all the time. And I thought we said, well, why don't we bring it all together? Because if you want to understand the Indian development journey, especially from independence, you cannot understand it if you don't know how India created a state, how it created an economy, how it tried to change society, and how it tried above all to create a nation of Indians. For a young country, this is not an easy task. So we wanted to have a comprehensive view, and that's why we joined forces. And we've been working on this for 5 years, and there's a lot of words. Quality we'll let you judge.
Okay, yeah, I guess Arvind has explained everything about how and why they thought about writing this book. Let me get into the book by asking you first. You describe India as a precocious democracy. Precocious as in, we say a child is precocious when, the child does something much more mature than its age. Similarly, they consider India precocious democracy, as in doing, things which a fledgling nation would not have done. It put heavy industries before starting something which would employ people. It had democracy itself being precocious. And it did so many other things, higher education, gross enrollment ratio and all, before primary education, PSUs before, small industries that would employ people, all of that. But why would a team led by Nehru at that time have thought about being India's democracy, as one sees generally, is statist? Why would India have done this slant to socialism? Because we were ruled for so many years by emperors and then by colonials, none of who was socialist. And then how did we get on this socialist path?
That's a very interesting question. I think in part, of course, it was the gestalt of the times. Because of the way India had been colonized by the East India Company, there was an understandable skepticism about capital and multinationals. Because of the exposure of the leadership, it is remarkable just how many of the leaders had studied abroad for a country that was grossly sort of illiterate. And of course, at that time, the leadership had studied largely sort of in the UK. Very few had studied in the US. And that was the gestalt of the times. The Soviet Union had won a great victory in World War II. So it seemed that the planning model and that model could be a pathway for rapid industrialization. So all of these factors come together. And of course, Indian capital itself was actually quite weak. So if you wanted to industrialize rapidly, you needed to organize state resources because capital markets were weak, the bourgeoisie was quite limited. So your alternatives were also quite limited. So it was in some ways a fairly, a choice that seemed to make sense at that time.
Right. Just to add, just to add to what Devesh said, I think sitting here today, one of the uses of history is that you have to always put yourself in the shoes of those people as they were at that point in time. And post-war, it's kind of, for us, it's not easy to understand. In the United States, they'd had the New Deal, so, government intervention. In the UK, there was the famous, turn towards the National Health Service. All of Europe was investing more in things. And of course, at that point in the 50s and 60s, we all thought, the world thought that the Russian Soviet model was the way to go for industrialization. In fact, there's a very famous incident where Nikita Khrushchev in 1954, he went to the United Nations, he picked up his shoe and slammed it on the podium and said, "We will bury you." And he didn't mean through nuclear weapons. He said, our model will do better than your model. And the last point I'll say is something that, Devesh always emphasizes is that it's a pity that, all our gaze of those leaders was always China, Russia, the West. We didn't look enough at Japan, Korea, Taiwan at that time because they were doing very different things. And we would have actually learned, I think, a lot had there been a more neutral gaze between West and East.
So since those early days, after we moved on, in fact, the book actually categorizes India's development story into neatly, different eras. 1950s to 1980 was the planning era. 1980s, there was some liberalization. And 1991, the new liberal. And then, post 2021, that's the new liberal, yeah. So, when we started off, at that time, India and China were the biggest suppliers of people to the world, the key exporters of people. Today, if you look, India continues in that path. China supplies factory products to the world. India supplies talent to the world. Why does India still have to send people out and not ever be China do manufacturing? And the book consistently says about how we missed the manufacturing step. We started with agri, like every other nation normally starts. And then instead of moving up the ladder through manufacturing into services, we leapfrogged into services. And therefore, we have no manufacturing jobs. How and why did this happen? And do we stay like this? Is there a way out? With all this Atmanirbhar and all that, will we start manufacturing?
So I'll just speak about the migration, and Arvind will follow up on the manufacturing. I mean, on the migration, start with this state. I mean, if there's any state that has a unique development model, Kerala agriculture wasn't a big driver. Manufacturing just never took off. Services is much later, and that too has been limited. Its main model of development, which is very distinctive, the only country in the world that has a similar model is the Philippines, which also just exports people. Unlike other East Asian countries, Philippines didn't do much in manufacturing. And essentially, the Kerala model of exporting people, where remittances became 25 to 30% of state domestic product, is because people leave for a reason, because of lack of opportunities. If there are opportunities, why would people leave, right? And then, of course, that Kerala model, by the way, we are now seeing has spread. As we know now, actually a very small minority of workers going to the Gulf is coming from Kerala. Now, the people from
UP
Kerala
has taken over now.
Yeah, now it's UP and Bihar. Half of all the people going from Gulf are going from there. Because again, UP and Bihar have a failed development model. So people are looking for opportunities.
And Punjab as well, right?
And Punjab, right? So the export of people is primarily because of a lack of options, of opportunities. Now that was more on the labor side. On the talent side is also a very distinctive. India is, we write in the book, no country has been as happy in exporting its best and brightest and being proud of it without asking why could we not have made use of that talent in our own country. We still celebrate, look, Indians have won X prize or doing so well, they are CEOs, all of that. But we don't ask, imagine if they had not left, what could they have done in the country itself? So, we show just how much, whether it is AIIMS or the IITs, even if you look at, we looked at high school results, those who were in the top 100 in high school results, in all of these, between a quarter and a half are outside the country. And when the tail end of your talent distribution leaves, the effects are not modest, they are quite non-linear. And I think that is a challenge that we haven't yet grappled with, because people leave for a reason.
So, just two or three things. One, to add to what Devesh said. Why I think Kerala is such a unique model, apart from what Devesh said, it has no agriculture, no manufacturing, no IT services, and this. And as he said, it's because, labor has left. But what is amazing about Kerala is there's a two-way flow of labor. Nurses and whatever go to the Gulf, they send back dollars. But then because so many people have left in the last 20, 30 years, people have migrated into Kerala from the rest of India, and Kerala is sending back rupees as remittances to the rest of the world. So this kind of two-way labor phenomenon is quite unique, and I think it's a fascinating thing, So Kerala is both exporting talent and importing low-skilled labor, which is quite unique.
Although, just to add, actually the Kerala model now that you see is what Italy and Ireland had. In the beginning of the 20th century, Italy and Ireland were, from the Western country, the biggest exporters of people, largely to the Americas, both Canada, US, Brazil, Argentina. 100 years later, both Italy and Kerala and Ireland are huge importers now of people. And that sort of transition is exactly what is happening in Kerala now, right? Because fertility declines, and of course that as incomes rise, young people don't want to do what are called the 3D jobs, which are the dirty, demanding jobs, construction, agriculture.
While we are on the topic of migration, I'm just thinking both of them are have migrated from India to the US. We've lost talent. And this book is full of data. It's a delight for anybody who loves data to go through this book. And one data that you may not know is that when you talk about people from less developed states coming to Kerala to fill in the nurses' vacancies here, is that Kerala, we only last week surfaced this data that we have 41 million Aadhaar cards issued in Kerala, while the population of Kerala is only 35 million. So we have 6 million outsiders who've taken Aadhaar cards in Kerala, who could soon be having MLAs and MPs. Starting with the Panchayat election that's coming up now, there are actually candidates from outside Kerala contesting for the first time in Kerala.
So in fact, that's another thing. Maybe Devesh will also have parallels elsewhere. My brother-in-law and his wife live here. And what seems to be also, just adding to your point, that the migration to the Gulf seems to be you go and come back. It's kind of circulatory. A lot of migration within India is also circulatory, but it seems like the migration into Kerala, the migrants are settling and, accessing, the children are settling and leading to now what that portends for the future in terms of political backlash, etc., is something that we'll have to, But we're digressing. We haven't answered your basic question about why India hasn't done manufacturing, right? So I think, if you were to ask me at least what were the singular economic failure of India, it is not being able to do labor-intensive manufacturing. And just to give you one statistic in terms of how much we have fallen short. Take China. China has about 25% of the global labor force that could manufacture labor-intensive goods. India also has about 22-25%, depending on when you measure this. China's share of global exports in low-skill commodities, forget about EVs and all of that, has been about 50% for the last 20-25 years. So 50% of total...
50% of world exports.
In these commodities. Guess what India's share has been in the last 30 years? Somewhere between 3 and 4% and been declining. So that is the magnitude of how much India has shortchanged its labor force. So now the question is why? And we've taken up too much time on this topic, but I think that, again, by the way, no phenomenon like this can have just one explanation. But there are a series of explanations we offer in the book. First, we never had the kind of agricultural burst and productivity like China did. Again, just to give you another China comparison, in 1978, just before the Deng reforms, China had the same amount of employment, heavy industries, public sector, steel plants as India did. It's only after their agricultural boom from 78, for the next 15, 20 years, that manufacturing itself became labor intensive because, poor people became rich. They wanted, cycles, sewing machines, things like that. And China started producing those first. In India, we never had that agricultural productivity revolution, and so we couldn't do the manufacturing. And then, of course, Indian regulation has been very, very constraining. We say that because in order to be competitive globally in these labor-intensive goods, the scale of manufacturing has to be huge. Foxconn factories in China employ routinely 50, 60, 100, 150,000 people, but we have very few. And so we say that in India we have midgets making widgets, so the regulations...
Foxconn factory, since you mentioned, employs the equivalent of what Infosys does in India.
Yeah. And then the question is, why is it that in the services sector, we are allowed to have, employment of about 200, 300,000, but not manufacturing plants? And then we have a series of other explanations. I think there's one which Devesh has a very good explanation as well. Devesh, you want to talk about the government and manufacturing?
So one of the interesting things, when people point to that, look, sort of labor market regulations were a big hindrance for large-scale labor-intensive manufacturing plants. I think one of the things we point out in the book is that there is another big distortion we don't realize, which is the distortionary effects of government employment. Especially, there are two elements. While the Indian state and government employment is actually not that large, however, most government employment is at the lower tiers, what's called now the sort of what used to be Group C and D. Now, wages for Group C and D are much higher than is warranted given their skills or what you would get in the manufacturing sector. So what happens is it bids up. Young people don't want to go into manufacturing because their reservation wages are being set by way higher government wages at the lower end of government. So India has, compared to other countries, very high wage compression between the Group A and the Group D. Because Group A, that's a very tiny number of people, but that is the most talented group. If they were in the private sector, their salaries would be much higher than what they get in government. On the other hand, Group C and D, if they were in the private sector, their salaries would be much lower. So of course, everyone wants a government job. So people spend 4, 5, 6 years, we show, waste millions of man years, literally taking government exams. 99% of them will not get a government job. 99%. Yet for that 1%, these 99% waste 4, 5 years studying for exams, which will not help them in anything else.
Just to finish off the topic with just a little piece to that. If our job prospects, as you say, are so bleak at a time when India is the fastest growing large economy, and we need to employ 1 million youth who come out every month, what would their prospects be? I mean, these are the best times as far as our the growth, if you look at mere percentages, at raw percentages, we are the fastest growing large economy. At this time, if India cannot employ them, the youth, then when is a good time? So do you think the prospects of migration will continue because we can't provide jobs here?
So I'll let Arvind handle the jobs in my. So migration 100% is going to continue. There is simply no way that India will be able to provide jobs, of quality jobs, for 1 million people.
That's a telling statement. India will not be able to provide quality jobs.
At least hinder. And remember, the AI and robotics revolutions have not yet hit. And there is going to be much greater automation happening, even in labor manufacturing sectors. So the fact that India will continue to export what it has done for the past 50 years, which is its people, that trend I think is very likely to continue.
So just to be fair about this, when we talk about the Indian economy not being able to produce jobs today when growth has not been very well, the truth is that ever since 1980, for about 30 years, we've been growing very rapidly and we've not been able to provide jobs. So it's a long-standing challenge that India has had for all the reasons that we've discussed and so on.
So it's a 45-year-old paradox.
Yeah.
That we're growing very fast, but there are no jobs.
I mean, I wouldn't say no jobs. There are not enough formal sector, reasonably paying jobs in India, because as we know, and especially in manufacturing, those are the ones that are missing. With labor protections, formal sector, reasonable wages, reasonably productive jobs. That's what's been missing, because essentially most people in India are in the informal sector, and that's been kind of the job creation. Now, I think the prospects for this are bleak, except there's no question, especially with AI coming, because remember, AI, the immediate impact of AI is actually going to be even more on India's success story, which is, services, those jobs are the ones that are being, automated and so on. So I think if anything, India is facing a double whammy. The jobs we never managed to create, we're not going to create. The jobs that we did manage to create are under threat from being displaced by AI. But that's why I think, last point, and I'll end here, bring it to the current moment. That is why I personally, and I hope Devesh as well, very strongly saw this China +1 opportunity as a major opportunity, because it gave us one last chance to do manufacturing like we never did. And as you know, in the last 4 or 5 years, Apple relocated, is slowly, progressively relocating to India.
Foxconn also.
Foxconn, Apple,
Plus Apple.
Plus Apple, exactly. So there was no reason why that could have, accelerated, especially if the Indian states had, improved, like Tamil Nadu's doing, or Karnataka is doing, or Andhra is doing. But now with the Trump tariffs, that whole model again has been, spanner has been.
So the China +1 actually that scenario has changed.
Changed, exactly, because of the Trump tariffs. And that's why, I think the problem acquires fresh urgency, today.
When you have two Harvard professors on stage, both of them have taught at Harvard, time flies. So I look at my watch and see it's 30 minutes up. So I only have 20 more minutes. We've spoken about statism being embedded in Indians right from independence. And then we went into migration and talent outflow and no jobs and all that. But I must ask you, 48% of Indians are still in the agri sector. We didn't, as you said, we leapfrog from agri into services, leaving that manufacturing step behind. We did not actually push agri enough in the early years, as you say in the book. And then we had the green revolution coming. And today we have a surplus food production. And the government has unleashed what these authors, I think rightly say, the Frankenstein of subsidies. Massive subsidies, urea subsidy, NPK subsidies, electricity subsidies, all sorts of subsidies, and we produce surplus food which we have to throw away. Our FCI godowns are full for the last 20 years plus. Isn't agriculture the elephant in India's room today?
Well, I'm not sure if I'd call it the elephant, but yes, the fact is that, and here I think the center has played in what began as a very positive role to jumpstart the green revolution with subsidies, but over time, especially its procurement policies, have started to do a lot of damage. So basically, rural India today, half of income in rural India is from agriculture. More than half now is non-agriculture
Non-agri,
income
okay.
in rural India. Of that half of that is from crops, and less than half of from crops is from cereals, rice and wheat. So the horticulture, animal husbandry has been growing much faster, where there are very few government subsidies. The subsidies are mainly in cereals, rice and wheat. It might seem ironic, India is the world's largest exporter of water. We are a pretty water-stressed country. Now, how is it the largest exporter of water? Because it exports agricultural commodities like rice, which are, of course, massive water guzzlers. So effectively, water, your precious natural resource, is embedded in a product that you're exporting, and you can export it because of all these subsidies. So essentially, I think over time, this has had particularly pernicious effects in northwest India, Punjab, Haryana. The water table has been falling. We see the huge negative environmental impacts of vast overuse of urea. We see now, there's now evidence coming out because of, there's what we call nitride poisoning. Urea has nitrogen as fertilizer, which has impacts on child development, cognitive development. So despite all these negative impacts, it's like a drug. It's very hard to take away. And ironically, most of these subsidies
being a
go to the
political
largest-
scientist, if you take that away, you have politically speaking, there is a withdrawal symptom of voters if the subsidies are taken away.
But that's a good way of putting it. Withdrawal symptom. I'm going to use that in the future. Yeah. See, but here's the thing, right, about agriculture and all the things that Devesh is describing. The paradox is this, and this is something that I don't think we have a very good explanation. And I'll come to your withdrawal, where I kind of slightly disagree with your withdrawal thing as well. Take fertilizer and power, right? These are one of the two biggest subsidies that we give. The fertilizer is given by the central government, and every state, especially every agricultural state, is giving subsidies.
Just to ask you one bit of statistic, fertilizer subsidy plus the power subsidy, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do they add up to more than our defense budget?
Probably they do. Yeah, probably they do. Exactly. So here's the paradox about these two things, these subsidies. A colleague here of mine is here, Abhishek Anand. We've done some work, which is in the book as well. 60 to 70% of these subsidies, in the case of fertilizer, it goes to the 5 or 10% maximum richest farmers. In power, the subsidies that we give to households, for example, again, 60, 70% goes to the richest 5% or 10%. Now, there is nothing about democracy that says that we should, because in a democracy, you want to give subsidy to the many. So when you give, free power to the poor, you get votes. You don't get the withdrawal symptoms. But if you give so much to 2%, 3%. I mean, it's a withdrawal symptom that you should be willing to accept, right? Because there's so many other costs that Devesh spoke about. And the other thing about I've lost my train of thought on the
subsidies.
On the subsidies is there's also nothing about socialism that says that we should subsidize the rich. Socialism is fleece the rich and poor. But here we are. In fact, just as a small anecdote, when we were writing the economic survey in India, and we're talking about subsidies, Arun Jaitley, the finance minister, called me aside and said, "Arvind, next economic survey, please focus on the middle class and rich subsidies and not on the poor subsidies." And that is true. So in that sense, it's kind of a policy which we should exit from, or exit should not lead to withdrawal, but we're not able to.
Fantastic. Yeah. Since you mentioned the economic review, I see a packed audience for a talk on economics. Who in the world would think Hortus would get so many people sitting, all seats occupied and standing for a discussion on economics? Their book says in the preface that the economic survey of 2017 was read by 20 million people in the first year. 20 million people reading India's economic survey of 2017. I reread it to see that it's not 2 million but 20 million. So if you speak stuff and you go in depth and it is readable, then people do read it. People do listen to professors like these two here.
Remember, the 20 million was without Devesh. With Devesh, we want to make it 60 million.
Good one, yeah. Because he was the chief economic advisor and he wrote the 2017 one. Time is running out fast. I have time only for one more question. So before that, I just want to share with you, their thoughts about, so what now would be a question in your minds also. They have given, they're not saying, these are the things that are going to happen, but they see some patterns, and 4 big patterns that they say are: one, the 4 disruptions. One is geopolitics. It is moving more from a rule-based order to something more transactional. If you saw what Trump discussed with Saudi Arabia last week, then it just underlines what these two men were saying. The second big disruption is technology, and with the deep fakes, we do not know the future of democracy itself. And with a literacy rate like ours, and tampering, as many Indians believe, the future of democracy may be may be in danger. Third disruption is climate change. We are the 3rd largest carbon dioxide emitter after China and the US. 3rd largest, yes. We do not have manufacturing, and we are the 3rd largest polluter on earth. I was in Delhi 2 weeks ago, and I could actually see people coughing and complaining about their pets dying out of sheer suffocation. So this is climate change. And for demography, we have added 1 billion plus people in these 75 years. And to add to that, what they were saying, that India cannot provide decent jobs for all these new 1 billion, each generation. And now let me come to the last question, because that's all what the time allows, is they have, in conclusion, they have said, they're not going to predict or answer the question whether India will be the next world superpower, or we'll do this, that. No. It is better to ask, they say, very sensible way of putting it, can India solve the AQI problem in Delhi? Because the answer to that question will answer the question to whether India will become the next superpower. And they have also explained why they say that. If can India solve AQI is such an important question to ask about this country.
So the reason I think we use that as an example is, look, Delhi is where India's political elite lives, where the Supreme Court is, it's the center of power. If the center of power cannot solve a problem that is choking its own children and grandchildren, why do we think it will be able to solve the many other complex problems? You know, the first Supreme Court case on Delhi's pollution was in the late 1980s. So the awareness of this problem goes back now 4 decades. And anyone, as you were there in Delhi, one can see how terrible. The number of additional deaths, if you see articles in the Lancet, etc., because of this India has of the air pollution problems, is now running to more than 1 million people a year. So what we point out is that, you know, something like AQI, air pollution, it is indeed a complex problem. There are no simple answers. It requires a lot of cooperative federalism. It's a term that Arvind has used a lot in the past. It requires the federal government to work with the states, with a whole range of stakeholders, from people who own cars, to the farmers who burn the stubble, to the poor people who burn biomass to keep themselves warm in the Delhi winters, to the many coal-based power plants that are not installing pollution control because it's expensive, etc., etc. Without that ability to have this strong cooperative federalism, it will be, we think it will be much harder for India to address the many challenges that any large country of its size necessarily will face. That's sort of what we do.
Arvind?
No, I mean, I don't have much to add. You know, just to say, in the book, what we say is that, look, India is a complex country, solutions are complex, but we did have some fantastic achievements as a nation. We built good institutions over time. We had a very pluralistic society, inclusive society. We had, you know, good workable relations between the center and the state. And these were these, and you know, broadly sense of a nation. Our state capacity has improved considerably. We're at the digital, you know, frontier of digital technology. So despite all the failures like not providing jobs, etc., there are some things that we did very well. And remember, it's very hard to do those in such a large and complex, diverse country like India. So at the end of the day, what we say is that do no harm, at least to those successes that we've built up. You know, whether it's democracy or pluralism or cooperative federalism, let's do no harm. And then let the entrepreneurial energy of 1.4 billion unleash that. And, you know, let's see where the chips fall.
That's a good way to put it, to summarize it. Before I go into the Q&A, I'm sure you've had a lot of takeaways already, but after reading the book, let me just give you these. The book is A Sixth of Humanity. I have these 6 nuggets from the book, which you may like to hear. Of course, you can pick up the book there. It's at the stalls. 6 nuggets, my takeaways from the book. 1, Hindus cleanse in the Ganga. India's politicians cleanse with a win in the elections. Once you win the election, everything is right. You know, whatever you do prior to that, it's all cleansed. 2, eye-opening. Private security is the 11th largest sector in India. Private security is the 11th largest job sector by employment. In 2017, we don't have the latest, but this is the latest. And the proportion, private security to public security, meaning the police and the Indian forces, is 5:1. We have 5x the number of public security in private security. 3, India, this is interesting. India does very well when the delivery is episodic. we've noticed we do our elections very well every 5 years. It's episodic. We do the census very well. Sadly, no census after 2011. We do the finance commissions very well. We do the Kumbh Mela very well. We do the ISRO launches very well. These are all episodic. You do one, and then after some time, one, and then one. Every 5 years, we are champions in doing the, whenever the delivery is episodic. But you cannot expect to go to a panchayat office and expect them to do good delivery every day after day after day. No, it's episodic. Once in 5 years, you find a good delivery. Yeah. Number 4. This is something that E.M. Foster wrote in 1935, and these gentlemen have quoted in the book. There's no God needed to rescue the untouchables. Just flush toilets will do. If we can provide flush toilets, there will be no more manual scavenging. And number 5, religious divide. I'm going to use this in my next video, my next episode. Religious divide has been the single biggest factor in, single biggest failure in nation building in India. Religious divide has been the single biggest failure in nation building in India. The latest of which happened just 3 days back, which again I'm using in my channel. A rebel Trinamool Congress MLA just 3 days ago announced that he's going to lay the foundation stone for a Babri Masjid in Murshidabad, West Bengal. And soon posters are all over Murshidabad saying that we are going to put up a Ram Mandir also in Murshidabad. And these gentlemen have written a book before this happened, months before that happened, that religious divide is the single biggest failure in nation building in India. And the last, the book itself is, thank you, the book itself is nothing to thank about, but be thankful about, but thank you for the applause. Yeah, and the sixth and the last, the book is titled 1/6 of Humanity, meaning our 145 crore, 1.45 billion make 1/6 of humanity. 1/6 of India is Uttar Pradesh, which if it were a nation would be the 6th largest country in the world after India, China, US, Nigeria and Indonesia. UP would be the 6th largest country. And to add to that, UP plus Bihar is 25% of India. If you lose there, you have no chance of ruling India. You can think about the Congress in UP and Bihar and the hopes that the party has to rule India. The floor is now open for a few questions because we have a few minutes. There are so many hands going up. I'm so thrilled to see this because we're talking economics. We're sitting by this beautiful seaside and we have economics in the heads.
My question is that a silver lining that we have is China plus one, thanks to Trump's.
China, sorry,
Yeah, you talk, the single silver lining that we have is one of the silver linings we have is China plus one, thanks to Trump and his tariffs. But the Trump and his tariffs and the China plus one might disappear along with Trump after a few years. That's number one. Secondly, do we have any chance of coming up in manufacturing anywhere near China? China took decades and decades of manufacturing to reach this level. As you talk about Foxconn and the book Apple in China explains, it took them 3 decades to reach this level. Does India have any chance of catching up anywhere near that?
So firstly, that I think one of the lessons we've learned watching the United States is that you can no longer say that once Trump goes or whatever, that we'll go back to the old regime. That certainty has gone. So what the future portends in terms of the trade regime or the financial flows or the technology flows is all up for grabs and up in the air. So that's point one. Point two is that, as you rightly said, it's going to take, it took China 30, 40 years. I think for India, you will have to do the same thing over 30, 40 years. But because of artificial intelligence and things like that, even if we did that, we would not have the same employment gains that China did over the last 30, 40 years. So we should not think, external environment is bad. B, it takes a lot of effort which we may not be capable of. And even if we succeeded, you would not get the same potential in the past. That's why therefore, manufacturing and all of that becoming like China is a good interim solution. It's not the real final solution to India's employment challenge, as it were.
Can I just add? I think we are not realizing just the scale and the degree to which China is investing in technology. China installs more robots than the rest of the world combined. And in labor-intensive manufacturing, as its per capita incomes increase, you lose competitiveness. But it is not been losing as much as we think because the automation is happening so rapidly. So I do think, and I think we make the point in the book, is that look, India can definitely increase its share in labor-intensive manufacturing from 2% to 5, 10%. It can increase it by 2, 3, 4-fold. But no, coming to China 40, 50%, that I think we should not have those delusions.
So just one last thing. I think this is something that I learned, which I want to share with everyone on China. China, as Devesh is saying, is dominating many of the new technologies. China is dominating, and we are way behind because, as Devesh often emphasizes, Indian firms have just not done enough innovation and R&D and so on. So that's another whole other story. But I think what people don't realize is China's comparative advantage in the future is going to be because it has become an electro state, i.e., it has built up its economy around electricity and sourced by renewable energy. So the renewable energy electro state is going to be the source of China's advantage. All the AI, for example, is very, very energy intensive, and similarly other technologies as well. So India should make a bid for, becoming similarly big and competitive in electricity and power, and that's a sector where we're lagging far behind.
Very interesting. Electrostate. And we have the bitcoins coming up, which also use a lot of power, right? And AI uses so much power. We have time for so many hands going up. It's tough to be a moderator. Would one of you please? Yeah.
See, I've read your Harvard paper, which said that our GDP is padded up by 2.5%. Okay. Now, 2 days back, the IMF has come and said, look, your figures we are not taking. It's C grade. It's all fudge. Now, looking back, what's your take on that? Added to that, the basic census itself is delayed. What's the solution?
So
The C grade.
I want to plead the Fifth Amendment. I don't want to incriminate myself. I think, I don't want to get into the GDP thing because I think it'll distract from this. But on the broader data issues and census, Devesh is the expert. Devesh.
No, so I think, look, the one thing that we had done since the late 19th century was the remarkable achievement of the census, which is an extraordinary complex exercise. And I think India had a remarkable record in accomplishing that. Now there were good reasons why the 2021 census didn't happen because of COVID. But I do think that to have postponed it till next year was a big mistake. And it's a costly mistake because when you're growing rapidly, there's large changes, you are flying blind in economic policy making because one of the things that I do is surveys. When you do surveys, you need all surveys to be representative. You need to have the census as your backing to know whether you are doing a representative survey. So I think it's a real tragedy that for reasons that we can speculate, but that we didn't have the census.
So on this, sorry.
So just to add, I do think that there are attempts to improve the national income accounts. I think there's a realization that things had fallen off track and that it is hard to do economic policy making if you do not know what is happening and not happening. Now, you know, the move to services, many of the things in services are actually not easy to capture through conventional ways in which we used to capture in the national income account. So one should also recognize that there are technical challenges in doing that. And to be fair to the government, we see some evidence of that happening. But you know, there are basic data that is not the problem of the central government. Take birth and deaths. These are things that states have to record. And many states, you know, crime data also comes from the states. We know that crime data is egregiously flawed. And we should hold the states also much more to account and not just the central government on the poor quality of the data.
So just on data, let me just say, what Devesh said about the census, we were, you know, in terms of the sample surveys, we were at the front. We were the, you know, Angus Deaton, the Nobel Prize winner, says India was at the frontier on these surveys. And so when the IMF gives us a C grade on the national income accounts, we should take it very seriously and we should address that. Maybe some of it is happening. But I think the point I want to make is that, you know, this is not a India-specific phenomenon. If you look at China over the last 5 years, the amount of data it has stopped publishing is staggering. Okay, do you say, oh, that's a communist country? The United States today does not produce the GDP data, the employment data, and the inflation data. So the point, broader point I'm making is the general drift towards illiberal democracies around the world. One of the casualties, a common casualty across countries, is suppression of data, manipulation of data, fudging of data.
My apologies to the audience. Our time has absolutely run out. My only fear is that, you know, so many, I'm delighted to see this overflowing crowd to hear two professors speak about economics. My only fear is that, you know, more people will, you know, seeing professors abroad like this, even more of our youth may fly abroad to other colleges. So after listening to them, congrats, you know, for drawing such a crowd here. And, you know, they've taken great pains to come more than halfway around the world. One of them has flown Washington, D.C. to Doha to Cochin, and the other from Boston to Doha to Cochin. I only drove 100 kilometers to Cochin. So thank you, gentlemen. Wonderful. Arvind Subramanian and Devesh Kapur for the book and for your presence. You were a wonderful audience. I cannot thank you enough. You must go and report this to the world that in a state called Kerala, you know, when you speak about economics, such a crowd gathers and you cannot get, you know, a seat.
One announcement. You know, Devesh and I would be happy to take a few more questions, and wherever the book is, we'll be sitting there. If you want to, you know, you don't have to buy the book. We'll answer your questions even if you don't buy the book, but we're happy to answer some. Is it okay, Devesh? Yeah.
So all of those who raise your hands can meet them. And, yeah. Great. Thank you very much.